A lot of people these days seem to have fallen somewhat out of love with AAA gaming. When they explain why that is, a word you often hear in the conversation is sanitized. AAA games, people say, feel like they've been focus grouped to death, with individuality all too often considered awkward and something to be avoided. On the flip side, I sometimes find there's a tendency in indie games to go very deliberately for that "hey, look how zany and out there we can be" angle that can at times feel a little forced. Project Starship X from Panda Indie Studio, who kindly supplied me with my copy of the game, is most definitely zany and out there. However, what I love about it is that nothing about it, not the characters, not the mad events, not anything about the game, feels remotely forced. Instead, the game manages to be weird and unique because I think it all comes from a weird and unique place. What we see here is a developer free to simply do what they like, and that creates a very genuine and honest atmosphere that pervades the whole experience. The game is a follow-up to last year's Project Starship. I played that original but didn't review it, and I found it to be a fun but flawed experience, reminiscent in some ways of the video game equivalent of an old B-movie. Even before playing, it was obvious that Project Starship X was going to be a more refined affair, but I wondered if it would be able to do that while still maintaining the first B-movie charm. It didn't take me long to realise the answer was a resounding yes. Project Starship X is just as fun and funny as its predecessor, but expands and improves on the first game's formula in just about every way. In structure, Project Starship X features some roguelike elements, and while those words all too often sound the death knell for my interest in most indie shmups, here the structure has been very smartly implemented, and while you can fall victim to some randomness, in general each run gives you as good a chance of success as any other, while still mixing things up enough to keep the game always feeling fresh. One of the clearest signs of how successful the game's been in this respect is that there's not really any one stage or boss battle that upon its arrival would leave me either groaning or gleeful. Instead, the challenges all feel well balanced, with progress coming down almost entirely to you. The options you have at your disposal for negotiating these stages initially appear to be fairly simple. You have a forward shot that will slow your speed when fired continuously, and in an interesting twist you have a dash move which will throw you forwards and leave you briefly invulnerable, and is something which has both offensive and defensive uses. At times it's absolutely necessary to use, as it can launch you quickly between laser streams in thrilling little chains. It does take some getting used to, and can be hard to judge and control, but it's certainly an original mechanic. There is also a bomb system, but these have to be earned through play and come in a variety of forms instead of just one screen clearing type, and in many ways they're closer to special attacks than traditional bombs. As well as bombs, the game throws a lot of different power-ups and special items at you, and it can take some time to work out exactly what each icon means and what it's going to do if you pick it up. These icons can variously deliver increases to rate of fire, or alterations to your main shot, side weapons, temporary overdrive power, or mercifully plentiful health pickups, as well as many more unusual effects. Bosses are plentiful and varied. Most stages have a couple of variants at their ends, and there are hidden bosses waiting in store too. The roguelike structure comes into play here as well, with the game changing based on your previous experiences. Do not be fooled into thinking you've beaten the game after you reach the end for the first time, because there are still many more surprises in store, and in reality that first ending is you just getting started. Who you come across can however affect your score in pretty big ways. Scoring is simple but works perfectly well. You can get up to a 4x multiplier simply by killing enemies quickly enough before a bar at the top of the screen depletes. This can be increased to ×8 when using overdrive, and up to ×16 when doing the same in hardcore mode. Of course, this is an area where randomness can come in, as which enemies you face when can greatly increase your scoring potential. But in general, you will find the further you go, the more you'll be rewarded. Your top score, by the way, is recorded in an online ranking. On your various journeys, you'll also encounter special sections and pieces of equipment that mix the gameplay up in even bigger ways. At the start of runs, you can often enter a tank, which increases your power but can't be used to dash, meaning you'll have to hop in and out of it to dance your way past lines of enemies or shots. The self-styled mad events return from the first title, and these see sudden, well, mad events occur, such as blinding light squeezing you into a tight corner of the screen, or a sudden shower of asteroids. There are also frequent sections that see you leave your spaceship behind and enter a land-based crawler which utilises a jump instead of a dash, and is often to be found by darting inside Super Mario style pipes dotted around certain stages. And that mention of Super Mario brings us on to one of my favourite aspects of this game, namely its cheeky little references and parody stylings that manage to work so well despite, or perhaps because of, there being so little explicit story or text-based explanation. The pilots are one of the clearest examples of how this works. Each one only has a very brief animation on the select screen, but those couple of seconds immediately invite you to like them, and their various expressions from cheeky confidence to horror-struck fear in their in-play box outs are never anything less than endearing. Adding further to the game's already considerable charm is an infectious soundtrack that cleverly reflects play and often alerts you to changes or upcoming hazards. In fitting with the rest of the game's character, it has this wonky but expertly managed drive to it and is almost worth the price of admission alone. Nothing is perfect, however, and there are some things here that may leave players frustrated. Some of these are almost inherent to the very nature of roguelike structure, and those who like those games probably won't consider any of this a problem, but for me they could cause some issues. First is just the randomness. Sometimes you're inundated with not just health pickups, but base health increases. Sometimes you're not. That's the way it goes in these games, but it's not something I will ever be a big fan of. Not least because it can lead, if you're particularly unlucky in the weapon power-ups you find, to you coming across enemies you essentially cannot kill in the time they're on screen. Bosses too can switch from being dismissed in seconds to long drawn-out battles of attrition from one run to the next, despite being the same fight at the same stage. Secondly, the fact you're going to replay the game and stages many times is built into how you learn the game. Now of course there are very few traditional shmups that anyone once he sees on their first try, but at the same time, most of them do at least feel like if you had superhuman reflexes, that would be possible. Here it is not. Many attacks require seeing them at least once to even work out how to avoid them, and others may trick you into launching yourself into a hidden danger. This has two drawbacks. One, that these early deaths can feel a little cheap, and two, that having encountered these sections a couple of times, many of them become almost too easy to survive. Once you've learned the trick, that's it. This is compounded by the initial difficulty of mastering the dash technique and a certain visual overload that can occur when blasting through the maddest of mad events. There were times where a decent run I was on would come to an abrupt end and I wouldn't even quite know what had happened. Now, like I said, some of these are just not going to be a problem for some people. They may even consider them positives. And I have to say, having played a few roguelike shmups in my time, Project Starship X does a far, far better job than most of making those mechanics rewarding and fun, and it certainly leads to a ton of replayability, both in terms of content and in terms of making you want to dive right back in to experience that content, which is arguably the most important thing of all. So on top of all the goofy playfulness, we have solid and fun gameplay and a ton of content to sink your teeth into, all set to an irresistibly enjoyable soundtrack. There are some elements that won't be for everyone, but that's true of everything, and I'd give Project Starship X an 8 out of 10, and I really hope a lot of people will give it a try. If you get the game, please do share your experiences. I'm confident most players will have a blast with this one, and I look forward to seeing what people think. Thank you as ever for watching, and hope to see you next time. Cheers.